true for the board as well. Some of our board members have been in direct response to the COVID pandemic. Others are doing handling virtual learning at home. All the contact through the board members is by virtual format as well, which is difficult at best, or at least for some of us anyways. With no social events and no door-to-door contact with neighbors from board members, it's been tough on membership, and our membership numbers are definitely down, which has a direct impact on our income. So if there's a silver lining to any of this, I guess it's hopefully that it's made us all appreciate what a wonderful neighborhood we have, and taking time to slow down a little bit and enjoy it, and taking care of each other and creating opportunities to enjoy life, even if at a distance. It's also given the board time to, with some of the input from the survey that we did, which we'll be going over in a little bit in more detail, the survey results, is giving us a chance to do some strategic investments that in a new website and a new membership platform that should really make joining, renewing, and communicating much, much easier. And our membership chair, Christopher Morley, will be going over some of the details of our new member portal shortly, after we take care of a couple other matters. And so I'm going to keep it short and sweet. I just want to say, please help us in making Briarcliff Woods to be the best that it can be in 2021. Certainly it's going to have to be better than 2020 was. And we're going to go over a little brief treasurer's report. So thank you very much. And the treasury report kind of speaks for itself. If just want to take a look at that for a minute, and then I'm going to hand it over to Wendy, and she's going to do what she does.
This is Christopher Morley. We can move on to the next slide.
Just taking a look here to see if there are any questions. Thank you. Next up, we are going to be voting on the slate of candidates for the Briarcliff Woods Civic Association 2021 board candidates. You'll see the 4 people listed here. Mark, Tom, Carolyn, and Christopher have very generously offered to volunteer to serve a 2-year term on the Briarcliff Woods Civic Association board, joining the rest of the crew that we've got. For voting this year, we're going to be doing a poll. So I will ask Juan to go ahead and start the poll, and then ask everyone to vote here if you approve the new candidates for the board in sort of a straight yay or nay fashion. We'll give everybody a minute to submit. And when the voting is complete, we should be able to share the results with the group.
Okay, I went ahead and closed it because 19 out of 24 voted, and it had been like that for the last 30 seconds or so. And as you can see, the ayes have it. 19 out of 19 that voted said yes.
Fantastic. Thank you. So with those results in place, here is the list of the 2021 board members for the Briarcliff Woods Civic Association, and all volunteer crew that works hard to make our neighborhood a great place to be. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Christopher Morley.
Thanks. Thanks, Wendy. So my name is Christopher Morley. I am your Civic Association's chair for the membership committee. But I have been in contact with Susan, and she asked if I could give a sort of a cursory look and give you some insight into the survey that was released last year. So our survey was sent out in February of last year. It was developed by Susan. Susan's background includes extensive work with survey measures, so she ultimately will be able to speak to the details of the survey. In addition to that, she'll be able to address more readily any questions that come up on the survey and the meaning behind some of the responses. As Ricky mentioned, she had a family emergency, can't be here. But because of this, and knowing following the annual meeting last year when cityhood advocates came to speak on the different options, we decided that we're going to set up a Zoom in the very near future to specifically discuss the cityhood survey results. We know that this was important to you and felt that glossing over it today would not do it any justice. So once Susan returns, we'll send out details on that cityhood survey meeting, which likely will be a Zoom as well. So on behalf of Susan and the board, I'd like to go through the rest of the survey from a high level perspective, and then I will continue speaking to the membership portion. The survey was sent out to, as you can see here, to 182 listed members via MailChimp, and the survey was left open for 1 month. There was an opt-in option, and at its end, 37% of households actually responded to the survey. Next slide. As for some general demographics on respondents, important here, in my opinion, was that having the majority of respondents being well-established residents to our community, having lived here long enough to see change over time was important. We felt that that historical perspective was valuable to the responses that we received for the remainder of the survey. Next slide. So when asked about what you felt the Civic Association should focus in on, next slide, what you can see from the survey results is that that safety came out on top as your most important area for the Civic Association's work, with a close second being attending zoning and planning meetings to protect the neighborhood. Last was sponsored meetings with officials. Next slide. When asked about strengthening the neighborhood, member respondents rated email and newsletter communication activities the highest, followed by a tie between creating a neighborhood directory and replacing our signage. Hosting events and organizing work days for the parks were considered the lowest priority. Leading into our membership presentation, I'll speak to this in a moment. We received great feedback from members. Next slide. Great feedback from members who responded to the survey on how they wanted the Civic Association to communicate with them. Next slide. Our respondents like email communication the most, which follows very true to form in the era of COVID. Our website and Facebook were distant runners up. There was Nextdoor. Post on Nextdoor was after email. And then bulk flyers out to your mail were considered sort of the last resort. And all of this is important because, as Ricky said, and spoke to briefly, is that 2021 is going to be a year of growth for us to find new members, and this data informs us as to how you feel it's going to be best approach for reaching out. And so this is kind of a nice segue into the membership portion of the meeting. Next slide. So for those of you, again, who I have not met personally, my name is Christopher Morley. I am the membership chair for the membership committee. My family and I moved into Briarcliff Woods onto LeBaron Drive in 2018. On today's call just now, I plan to briefly cover a few topics, which will include giving you an overview of our neighborhood, its membership, the association membership at a glance. I'll also give a plug for our upcoming membership drive, reiterating the association's vision for 2021. I'll speak to the directory and I'll walk you through the basic architecture of our soon to go live website, its interactive member portal and privacy controls. I'll wrap up by speaking about some of the membership committee needs. If you were not aware, Briarcliff is just under 1 square mile, with a population of approximately 1,900 people. I gave a range here because you can go and you can see on some websites that they actually count over all the way over to Skyland Trail, all the way down Claremont as part of Briarcliff Woods. But in effect, Briarcliff Woods itself is our 1 square mile of boundary. There are 654 individual parcels in our community. And within that, there are 236 members that represent 137 separate households. So important for our 2021 growth planning, there are approximately 811 persons living in our Briarcliff Woods neighborhood who are non-members. So our goal in 2021 is to change that. Next slide. Knowing that many of you survey respondents have been residents in our neighborhood for over a decade, you may recall some of the association's history and action. In the 2000s, there was the contentious activity around the intersection of Briarcliff and Claremont Roads, which involved a nightclub, as well as the former plans for McDonald's, where Quick Trip now stands. And important to 2010s were support and contribution to traffic impact analyses, CDC studies on late night retail association to crime, and presentation of analyses on property taxes and city revenues during the cityhood debates. And now in the 2020s, we've been involved in many ongoing discussions related to the development of the CHOA properties, the Williamsburg Plaza, and cityhood options. We expect this decade to be full of more calls to action for the association, and we look forward to being a voice at those tables. Next slide. So some of you may have wondered from time to time, what does my $25 annual fee actually go to? And some of what the annual fee funds have included historically have been outreach events, popsicles in park, things like this. It represents time spent attending and contributing to substantive and important zoning meetings and actions, and supports the ongoing beautification efforts. As we look to 2021, we will be hoping to expand what exactly the association does in effect beyond these historical pieces. Next slide. So in the next few slides, I'm very excited to walk through what is the basic layout of our soon to go live new Civic Association website. I'm excited because not only will it be interactive, but it'll be available and fully functional as a mobile sort of smartphone app. And so everything you'll be able to see and do on your website, on the website on your computer, you'll be able to do just as easily on your phone. Our expectation is that the website will go live in the next 30 to 45 days, and the content right now is already built into the website. We're just I'm trying to prettify it right now. I'm trying to make it aesthetically pleasing to look at. So I look forward to sending you all the new link soon and letting you walk through it. The layout is going to be similar to what you see here, with several key categories and drop-down options with each category. You'll be able to see your board members, bios of each, a way to contact them. You'll have access to our bylaws and newsletters. You'll be able to find resources and contacts for important and relevant community-specific areas such as schools and recreation, businesses and government here locally. Events will be posted regularly, and you'll be able to register for these events via the website. Next slide. Exciting though is this piece for me. It's going to be a private member portal that you'll be able to access to manage your personal membership information and your specific member content. Let me walk you through some of what you'll be able to have control managing in the near future. Next slide. So for the sake of this exercise, I've made up a fake neighborhood member. His name is Cliff Woods and his wife is Briar Woods. There are going to be 7 areas which you'll have control over, not only the status of specific fields, but how your information can or may be shared with the community, such as the membership directory. Here you can see you'll be in control of your contact information, as well as your login and password. Next slide. Next, you'll be able to see your membership status, see your history with the association, basics on annual renewal. As you may or may not, if you have been involved in PayPal and annual membership, You can establish settings through this member portal to set up annual reminders for paying, or you can set up a set it and forget it kind of scenario with rolling automatic payment options. Here, you'll also be able to add your family members to your household. Next slide. Here at events, you'll be logged. Events that you participate in will be logged, as well as how you participated, whether you're an attendee, a volunteer, and a manager. So it'll give you a little bit more intimate understanding for how you are involving yourself in the association's activities and how the association can help to build the activities around you. Next slide. Donations will be cataloged here. And that's not just monetary donations. It's time, it's materials, whatever you decide to generously give, we can catalog it here. This is also in effect going to serve the basis for tax letters each year. Next slide. So knowing that email communication was important to member survey respondents, you'll be in control for how, when, and if you are receiving email notifications, whether you want to receive anything that the board sends out, only new and upcoming event bulletins, or only emails related to projects and committees you're participating on. So you'll be in control of your email subscriptions. Next slide. Now this, to me and to us at the association, this is very important, and we feel it would be important for you too. You'll have the ability to very easily manage who has access to what data of yours across the membership. This is most relevant to things like, again, the membership directory. Whether it's your name, your email, your address, your email address, or everything, you will be in control for what is shared. Next slide. And finally, as this is a neighborhood association, we personally like to brag about our events and members. We hope that you're of the same ilk. And if you are, you'll have the option via your member portal to upload profile or a civic association event photos directly from your smartphone into your private member portal. Following that, if you want to make those available to all members, there's a very easy selection process to say, do you want your photo to be available to all members? Do you want it to be available only to the board or only for you? You will be in control of that. Next slide. So a few final points to membership, because I'm really looking forward to hearing from Commissioner Rader. So wrapping up the membership portion here. First, we know that all of you are chomping at the bit for an updated member directory. We're in the process of working on the final layout now. We expect it'll be distributed in early to mid-February, so very soon in the next few weeks. When you receive that, if you see any errors, please do not hesitate to let me know. Contact me directly if you need. It'll also be, whenever the website goes live, it'll be available via the website. Next, I'd like to put out a call to any and all of you who may be interested in serving as a membership committee member. You don't need to be a board director for this, only have an interest in growing our membership. We have several initiatives that I'm working on for 2021, which I could really use your help and support. Some of those include tracking new residents who are coming into our neighborhood so that we can provide them welcome baskets. Building out outreach capacity to community organizations and events is a big one for me as well. We had a very successful food drive this past July supporting the Toco Hills Community Alliance. And we've begun talking about local events such as neighborhood bike rides and larger events such as having a team to participate in the Hunger Walk 2021 to support the Atlanta Community Food Bank. There's also an initiative I'd like to personally develop this year for our website, which builds upon the wonderful Briarcliff Woods history that R.A. Pendergrast wrote in 1981. So if there are any historians or armchair historians out there who are interested in hearing more, please don't hesitate to reach out. And just a plug, not just for my committee, but for all the others, even if it's not for the membership committee, there are several other committees which I'm sure would welcome layperson support and participation. So if there are any committees that you have an interest in, beautification, safety, schools, can't think of the rest off the top of my head, finance, please don't hesitate to reach out. If you don't know who to contact, just reach out to me and I'll put you in touch with the right person. Or you can send an email over to our association's website, which is briarcliffwoods@gmail.com. And finally, I'd ask that you recall that our vision is membership growth for this year. 811 persons that right now are registered as non-members in Briarcliff Woods. So if you know of non-members, don't hesitate to share their information with me in the Civic Association, so we can give them reasons why they should join. Again, it's strength in numbers. It helps to build capacity for all of the activities, initiatives, and calls to action that the association is involved in. Again, please don't hesitate to reach out to me at any time regarding membership committee or anything else. ChristopherAMorley@gmail.com. And now I'd like to turn it over to board member Gunter Sharp to lead us with the zoning committee comments.
Thank you. I'm going to introduce Commissioner Rader because I think this is the best time for him to present. Commissioner Rader has been our district commissioner for several years. He was also chair of the Board of Commissioners recently. He had the foresight to identify the need for a more granular, a more detailed planning guide for the Claremont-Briarcliff intersection and the surrounding area. And I think that is one of the major accomplishments done by the Board of Commissioners with the help of the developer who's planning to develop part of that area. So at this point, I'd like to introduce Commissioner Rader. You may have to unmute yourself.
Thanks, Gunter. Can you hear me? Great. Well, thanks very much. And I certainly appreciate folks taking time out of their Sunday afternoons to participate in the Civic Association meeting. It's a critical characteristic, I think, of particularly District 2, that we have strong local civic associations that are not only concerned about what happens outside of their boundaries or in proximate areas, but also work to build civic capital within the community. The reference to the Toco Hills Alliance and their work on food insecurity is particularly close to my heart, as we have worked to support their capacity to build more ability for them through a truck and a freezer, refrigerated truck and freezer that helps them to better be able to fulfill their mission. And it's such a great grassroots organization. We were doing some work to support those organizations with staffing costs that were hard to meet because of the pandemic. And what we found was with the Toco Hills Alliance, we really needed to work on their infrastructure because they really didn't pay anybody to do what they did. So I just think that's a great indicator and really appreciate y'all's support of them. As Gunter had mentioned, one of the major focuses over the past year and really over the entire term of my service on the Board of Commissioners has been the commercial district at the intersection of Briarcliff and Claremont. And with such a stable and I think attractive neighborhoods that surround this area, it's kind of surprising that commercial district had for a long time not reflected the community that surrounded it. The part of the problem was that the commercial stock was very old. Some of the persistent land uses there were really obsolete, and it had been sort of backfilled with auto repair shops, really marginal sorts of entertainment businesses and other activities that, again, were not really relevant to the neighborhoods that surrounded it and did not contribute much. As Gunter had mentioned, I guess about 2 years ago now, we had to consider and ultimately had to reject a proposal for highway-oriented commercial in the northeastern quadrant of, or the northwest quadrant of that Briarcliff-Claremont intersection where those auto uses were. There'd been a proposal for a gas station, fast food and oil change there. That based upon the rather generic and perhaps obsolete character area plan that we had there as a neighborhood character area were uses that the planning department deemed to be compatible and consistent with that plan, but obviously didn't meet the expectations of the community for new development there. Another defect of that proposal was that it did not properly interact with the multifamily activity that was surrounding to it. There is a condo project there that had a great stake in the issue, and appropriate transitional buffers weren't able to be achieved. So ultimately that project, we encouraged the developer to withdraw it. Unfortunately, that developer then petitioned for annexation into the city of Brookhaven, where they felt like they would get a better hearing for their proposal. Ultimately, Brookhaven, I think, didn't take them up on it when their police chief said, well, if we control the intersection at Claremont with I-85 and the intersection with North Druid Hills at I-85, then we're going to have to enforce all of the traffic laws on that section of I-85. And he said he needed 5 more officers to do so. At that point, Brookhaven got cold feet on it, and the project went back on the market. And Stein Investments took a look at it. They had consulted with me a little bit during their preliminary work, and I worked to describe what my perception of community priorities were. Obviously, their principals likewise live in the community, and so they had a pretty good handle on things. Ultimately, their proposal was for a market rate multifamily project with a feature that was basically a restaurant feature on the corner between Briarcliff and Claremont. It, as I mentioned, was a market rate project. Because of the configuration of the land there, though, the calculated density of the site was very high. And so there was a real concern that it was incompatible and inconsistent with the current plan in the area. Nevertheless, it seemed inappropriate to redesignate it at a plan category that would accommodate that higher density. And so what we resolved and proposed to the developer and to the community was that we would take another look at this character area plan. Now the Briarcliff at Claremont character area really stretches east-west along Briarcliff Road from about, well, the sort of the back of the lots that are at Forest Green, west over to the Briarcliff Oaks senior residences there. And so, and then on the other side of the road through some consistent, and apparently I'm getting a delivery in my dog. The villas on Briarcliff on the one side, and then the creek there that crosses Innswood on the other. So we took a look at that entire area. We basically confirmed that it was not a regional center. And in fact, probably the demand for growth there was more related to growth at the new medical center down Briarcliff, and the employment further up Claremont towards Buford Highway, Century Center, and those other areas. So we knew that there was a demand for higher density development there, but that we did not believe that that development would take the form of a employment destination or other activities that would classify it as a town or a regional center. So our approach was to look at what appropriate densities the area could support given its infrastructure, and to suggest those densities as a potential amendment to the character area plan for that neighborhood center. We vetted that with stakeholders that were representing surrounding communities, Briarcliff Woods, obviously, but also Sagamore Hills, North Druid Hills Residents Association. And we really fast developed a consensus that these densities would be appropriate, but that there was further work to be done in the area. And so that further work has been identified, but not necessarily completed. There are a couple of key elements of this that I have a lot of interest in. One is to improve traffic circulation in the area, and particularly the traffic that moves off of I-85 on the exit ramp there at Claremont, and then goes that brief block south to Briarcliff, and then tries to make a left turn onto Briarcliff into Briarcliff Woods and all the neighborhoods that are north of there. Anybody that's ever tried to commute that way, even now, after the reduction in travel through the pandemic, knows that it is a very sticky intersection. It's encouraging Georgia DOT to try to increase capacity of the roads in that area. But a lot of the friction and the impedance associated with that traffic movement is that short block between I-85 and Briarcliff Road. So one of the ideas that came out of the small area plan and that we're pursuing is looking at another connection between the I-85 access road to the west of Claremont Road down to Briarcliff Road, probably in the area that is currently defined by the power line easement, where nothing can be built in any event, because of course it's encumbered by that power line easement. You can't build buildings underneath it. So one idea, and one that we're trying to advance with GDOT, is to suggest that if and when Williamsburg and Briarcliff Audubon Apartments are redeveloped in the future, then we should look at that particular corridor as a place to be able to put in a new connecting road. That connecting road would do two things. One is that it would provide a means for people to be able to proceed up Briarcliff Road to the east and the north without having to travel on Claremont Road, and that would help to diffuse traffic that is on Claremont away from that's really destined for Briarcliff, and that it would not generate a lot of new traffic through the neighborhood, but instead give folks that lived on the northern or the eastern part of Briarcliff an easier way to get across the intersection and into the neighborhood. The second thing that road would potentially do is to give a alternative main street for any development that would occur in those areas that I had described, the sort of Briarcliff Audubon / Williamsburg shopping center area, and that would be far better than that any new development there trying to use the Claremont frontage as their primary main street, so to speak. So those two characteristics are ones that we're going to explore, both with Georgia DOT, because it's their responsibility to try to get traffic through those intersections, and they also obviously manage the access road, but also as it relates to any new development that would spring from the master plan in that area. So that's one key element of it, is that new connector road between Briarcliff and the I-85 northbound access road. Now, nothing's been decided there, and certainly we would want to see a much more detailed analysis before we were dedicated to it, but it did come out of the plan as a transportation improvement and a link that ought to be better studied and understood within the context of new development there. A second transportation element of this is not a roadway transportation element at all. In fact, it is non-motorized transportation, and that involves multi-use and bike pedestrian access to that particular node, and to connect areas of Briarcliff Woods as well as Sagamore Hills to that area and to destinations beyond it. Many of you know that the Peachtree Creek Greenway project that has been organized around an effort in Brookhaven and Chamblee to provide a multi-use trail in the North Fork Peachtree Creek corridor, ultimately envisions crossing I-85 at Fisher Trail Park and proceeding up North Fork of Peachtree Creek as far as the Mercer University area, and perhaps even beyond on that North Fork branch of the Peachtree Creek trail system. There is another branch of the DeKalb County Trails Master Plan that is envisioned to connect the existing Burnt Fork branch of the South Fork Peachtree Creek Trail, which is now constructed throughout Mason Mill Park and into Medlock Park, up in the general direction of that power easement to this area that we've been discussing. And Commissioner Kathy Gannon, who served 16 years on the Board of Commissioners, and was very instrumental in the development of trail system, and very protective of the stable neighborhoods of this part of the district, committed discretionary funds to study those multi-use trails in two alignments. One was the Peachtree Creek Greenway from that Fisher Trail point that the trail would cross I-85 all the way up north into the Mercer University area. And then the second part that she put some resources behind on her way out of office was to look at connecting that Burnt Fork branch of the South Fork Peachtree Creek Trail with that point there where the Peachtree Creek Greenway would emerge under I-85 at Fisher Trail Park. So both of those trail systems are of critical importance to Briarcliff Woods. As we're trying to scope that study, we're recognizing two things. First of all, they could provide a great amenity for folks within these communities so that you have an alternative to getting in your car to go to many destinations of importance and attraction. If obviously if we could cross under I-85 and get on the Peachtree Creek Greenway going south, that system is intended to intersect with the Beltline there near Armour Otley, and thereby connect that system all the way down into the Beltline network to all of those destinations that have been so attractively redeveloped in closer to the core of Atlanta. And then with the notion of the trail proceeding in the corridor of the power line easement down to Burnt Fork, that particular system would link to critical destinations such as Sagamore Hills Elementary School, to obviously the parks there at Mason Mill and Medlock, but also on into the Clifton corridor, where there is a major employment center that I would venture to say that many people in the neighborhood have to reach on an ongoing basis. The library is also there, and there are North DeKalb, or the Central DeKalb Senior Center is likewise at Mason Mill Park. So clearly lots of opportunities for linkage in those directions also. The other part, I think, of the sort of founding assumptions there is that a multi-use trail system does not always have to be on a separate dedicated right-of-way. Many of the trails that we have travel through river or creek bottoms and along riparian corridors, where they are in fact sort of blazing new linkages, and there are no existing infrastructure in those areas. In those particular corridors, the trail represents not only a means of making links that cars can't, but it also represents a great amenity in terms of being able to connect people to the natural environment in these riparian corridors. But also important is the fact that many of our neighborhoods are appropriately and well buffered from high traffic districts by virtue of the fact that we don't have the streets immediately punching out into major roads and therefore see the cut through traffic. That leaves many streets such as Fisher Trail, and then south in Sagamore Hills, Bryanwood and Alderbrook, as being relatively lower volume neighborhood streets that can potentially accommodate the movement of pedestrians, bicyclists, as well as cars, provided that the right signage and markings are there in the roadbed so that folks recognize the rights of those other road users and are going slow enough and are giving the appropriate wide berth to folks in those corridors. Another advantage to being able to work off of existing streets is that we don't end up at odds with perhaps property owners that are used to the power line easements being more private and their backyards aren't exposed. And then the third obvious advantage may be that it could be less expensive to be able to go the same distance if we use some of the existing streets. So one of the things that we're looking at is where are the key sort of links that are not made by the street system that might be made by the trail system that would allow you to travel along a neighborhood street and then jump through a area where there is no roadway to a direct destination. And so we'll be kicking off that process, and it'll obviously include a great deal of public input and public reflection on exactly how we want to achieve those linkages. But if we're going to see more intensity of development at a intersection like Briarcliff and Claremont, I think it's incumbent for us to elaborate the transportation system to make sure that everybody can get there and that they don't have to get behind the wheel of a car in order to do so. And that includes kids, older people, as well as the adults in the neighborhood. One other critical system I think that we need to talk about in terms of that small area plan is the stormwater system. As those of you who have lived in the area know, there is a branch of Turtle Creek that sort of disappears as it goes under Briarcliff Road, going northward under the freeway and ultimately to join with Peachtree Creek in the Sam's Club area. A lot of that has been placed in pipes during older phases of development, but those areas nevertheless are floodplains, and we need to understand what the hydrology of the area is, make sure that any development there does not further exacerbate the degradation of that hydrology, and to understand what function those lowlands provide in terms of stormwater storage capacity. Again, Briarcliff Audubon, and to a lesser extent, the Williamsburg Shopping Center were really built before I think proper care was made of that. And so that hydrology in the area, the options on daylighting or otherwise managing that stream, and how exactly we approach accommodating the development that we said would be acceptable and appropriate in that area, given the natural environment, I think is an area that we're still going to have to work on. So let me touch on another couple of points, and then I would be glad to take questions. The Friends of Pendergrass Park have worked very hard over the past few years to prepare the park for some major improvements. We have gotten bids on that. As seems to always be the case, the bids exceeded the estimates that the Recreation, Parks and Cultural Affairs Department gave us for that. And I've recently made the decision to make more of our District 2 park bond proceeds available to actually be able to complete the scope as designed for that park. So we should be able to get underway with those improvements with a little bit more public money over the next couple of months. When sort of this soggy weather is over with, we'll be able to build the parking. There is some irrigation, and then play ground preparation for that park as this phase of those improvements. It's been really very inspiring to see how the community has really rallied around Pendergrass Park. It's central to the neighborhood and I think very important to the community. And so I'm very committed to making sure that that park continues to grow in its capacity to fulfill neighborhood desires there. Another important improvement that we have committed to and that we're making progress on is a sidewalk on Crestline Drive to go as far as Chrysler up to Briarcliff Road. Crestline is one of the older original streets in the neighborhood. I think that it probably predates the subdivision, and in spite of being, quote, a neighborhood street, it nevertheless carries a pretty good amount of through traffic due to the folks that proceed off of La Vista through Fair Oaks, down Crestline, and in this direction, trying to filter through the neighborhood. And the geometry of the road, both vertical and horizontal, are such that it is not safe to walk on the side of the road because you can't see people coming at you and they can't see you as they crest these hills. So we're working now to develop a design for a sidewalk along Crestline, and probably the engineers have identified the potential for perhaps a traffic circle or a roundabout at that Chrysler Crestline intersection. Both of those will, obviously be improvements that will help to communicate the residential nature of the street and be able to slow traffic in the area. Another complaint has been the inability to get traffic calming on that route for two reasons. First, the speed limit is 35 miles an hour, which puts it outside of the speed limits of our neighborhood traffic calming program. And secondarily, it's classified as a, well, I think that's it, because it's a neighborhood street, but it's 35 miles an hour. So our rules for traffic calming require that speed limits be 30 miles an hour or less. So what we're working on now is to make sure that we have the critical mass if the folks that live on Crestline would like a traffic calming district through petition, that we can lower the speed limit to bring it within the eligibility guidelines. But the twist to that is that there is state law that limits us on lowering speed limits if prevailing speeds are too high. So what we're going to try to do is make sure that if we lower the speed limit, then the neighbors that would be participants in the traffic calming district will adopt that district so that we can take it off the radar list from the state and then put it on the traffic calming list so that there are other means of keeping the traffic from going too fast on that particular route. So that's another process where we're trying to sort of weave our way or thread our way through the regulatory framework and get people in that part of the community what they'd like to see out of the transportation management system for them. I think I'll stop there and see if there are any questions from folks. And I can certainly look here on the chat and see if there are some here. Let's see, where are we on a potential timeline for Williamsburg Plaza redevelopment based on where we are today? 2 to 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? Well, you know, often we in government think that we can call those shots. Ultimately, the redevelopment of these areas are market based and privately based decisions. I think that what we will see is, as I understand it, there are two key elements of it. One is the mortgage structure of the Briarcliff Audubon Apartments. Apparently, that apartment complex is financed with a loan that cannot be prepaid. And so that loan will have to play out if Briarcliff Audubon Apartments are going to be part of the redevelopment. And then the second part is obviously Williamsburg Plaza itself. That's recently changed hands. I believe it's also in the hands of Stein Investment Group. And, you know, there are some out parcels that they're working to acquire that would make it more amenable to the, you know, to the redevelopment there. But we're preparing the regulatory framework. Ultimately, it's going to take a private decision as to when that redevelopment occurs. I'm looking here on some of the others. In your opinion, what are the pros and cons to all of the DeKalb County cities that have popped up? You know, municipalization is not a decision that county commissioners make. So I have tried to consistently communicate that that decision ultimately is a decision that the legislature and the communities that end up voting on that are really the better ones to make those decisions. The one issue that I do try to elevate is the issue of equilibrium as it relates to tax base and including the people that are going to be affected by land use decisions within the boundaries of those jurisdictions that are making those land use decisions. So I'll give you a good example of that is that Brookhaven jumped the freeway to annex the area where now this large medical center is rapidly developing. It will be a regional destination and it will generate a great deal of traffic. But Brookhaven does not have any obligation from a municipal representation point of view to those neighborhoods that are to the east of their very intensive node going to the neighborhoods to the east of there. So it's very important that those interests be represented and that Brookhaven take the interests of those stakeholders into account when they make those decisions. So that's one of the reasons that we've been trying to get you know, the city to pay more attention to those unincorporated areas that surround it. And I think it's also the reason that a neighborhood like La Vista Park decided that it should annex into Brookhaven so that they would be within the government that makes those land use decisions that are going to have the most effect on them. So I-85 does constitute, I think, a very effective boundary between cities. And I was disappointed to see Brookhaven jump that boundary because I think it was a natural boundary between that city of Brookhaven and the rest of the county. However, they didn't do that. The landowners that are annexing, these commercial, in particular institutional landowners, I think are looking for perhaps a more laissez-faire attitude on development from Brookhaven. Thought that they'd get a better hearing for their intensive development plans from Brookhaven. And so that's one of the motivations that they had for annexation. Emory University famously did a similar thing. Their entire 700-acre annexation was connected by a 75-foot land bridge between the city of Atlanta and their area. So, those are challenges that are primarily unresolved under Georgia state law. Ultimately, I think that we can reach an equilibrium. I'm not going to suggest one way or another. I can tell you that the county can continue to provide, I think, services to areas. And you see some of your basic services, particularly fire service is still a countywide service. Those who are proposing Vista Grove are suggesting that they're going to keep county police as well as fire. So it is not impossible for that coexistence, but it is land use and those boundaries that are particularly important in those land use decisions, I think. Let's see, let me go now to progress of continuous sidewalk along Briarcliff from Lakeside High to Claremont. That is a project that I'm working to try to get in the SPLOST program. Obviously, it's a long stretch of the road. It's not a cheap section to put a sidewalk in, but we are trying to squeeze that out of the SPLOST program. What we may well see insofar as we're now in our third year of the 6-year SPLOST is that we may get that project started and then try to complete it through another year of SPLOST. But we certainly know, and particularly at least that section between Crestline, where we're putting in a sidewalk, north to the Lakeside High School area would be a very good place to get some sidewalks so that kids can walk to school there and that others can walk along Briarcliff without putting themselves at risk. So probably that's a project that you'll see some of out of this SPLOST, but other parts of it out of the other one. Another question, can Crestline become a 25-mile-an-hour street consistent with Fair Oak? I think that that's much more likely if we're able to get a traffic calming petition approved in that segment, because really speed tables are designed for a 25-mile-an-hour traveling speed. So that I think would be consistent with the traffic calming district. Is there any way to strengthen our tree ordinance so we lose fewer trees? I think yes. Rewriting our tree ordinance is well overdue. I'm committed to trying to reserve funding for a consultant to do a tree ordinance rewrite. There are 2 or 3 big things that I'd like to see in a new tree ordinance. First is, I think that we've come to the point to where we need to see tree removal permits on individual lots. I don't seek to make those onerous or burdensome to have, but too often now what we see are developers buying a single family home, taking off all of the trees and then maximizing the intensity of development on that lot with a replacement house so that the lot is just a tear down lot, and that seems to be very disruptive. I think that we ought to regulate cutting of trees, particularly in a circumstance like that. Another area that I think that we've got to perhaps take a look at is often and regrettably, people that want to cut trees see the cost of paying a fine for illegally cutting a tree to be a cost of doing business. And so they'll cut trees knowing full well that it violates the tree ordinance. But then they just pay the fine. It's a misdemeanor, so it's limited to $1,000 fine. And they consider it a cost of doing business. My sort of approach to that I'd like to explore is to see if it isn't time for us to license tree services in DeKalb County, so that if they violate the law, their license can be withdrawn and they can no longer do tree cutting in DeKalb County. I think that's a good way of getting the people that actually do the cutting, rather than those that would be ordering the tree cutting, to have some skin in the game. And if you can't get a tree service to cut the tree, then the tree won't get cut. So let's see, what's the latest update on zoning rules for self-storage? We deferred action on that at our last Board of Commissioners meeting. We are putting in some safeguards to make sure that the new self-storage that occurred on Briarcliff behind the Target won't be such a disruptive project. One of the things that we have to realize is that most commercial development zoning categories actually are not developed to their full entitled density. That's because if it's a retail store in particular, most retail stores are 1 story tall. There's not really a market for a 2 or 3 story tall retail store. And they typically have to have surface parking that would provide places for the patrons of the store to be able to park. Self-storage, interestingly, is not constrained by those two things. These, particularly the mini storage, which are the multi-story buildings with an elevator, they can fully exploit the 35-foot height limitation, and they can fully, and they don't need much parking. So they much more intensively occupy that that entitlement. We need to get a handle on that, because they generate buildings that are very different from the ones that surround them. And then the other part is that we need to recognize that a street does not constitute a buffer between an intensive development and a neighborhood that may be across that street. One of the disruptive things about that particular project was that it went right up to the setback on the residential street, Nob Hill, that went behind it, and that the trees that were in that setback, there was no buffer there because the street constituted the transitional buffer. So we're looking at requiring a transitional buffer, even if there's an intervening street, and working to make sure that those buffers contain the type of vegetation and replantings that help to moderate between those. There are other elements of it. The ordinance is currently online. You can see it in our last zoning meeting packet that was online and was sent out for last Thursday. And you can also call our office if you'd like to get more information on the new regs that we're trying to put in for self-storage facilities. Let's see, the Fisher Trail Park project is going on since 1997. Why is it so long to get trails in our area? Trails, unfortunately, have not had a real dedicated means of funding before we had a SPLOST program, or at least local funding. We were successful in getting federal earmarked funding for the trails in Mason Mill and Medlock, and for some trails along the South River corridor in South DeKalb. I think that we'll see more work on trails get done now that we have a SPLOST, and that we dedicate those things to, and I'm trying to see that I think we'll see those now with the SPLOST money. So I hope that's enough. I again apologize if I took too much of the agenda, but wanted to speak to the issues that were in the chat. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Rader, for your time and for your patience in answering so many questions. We really look forward, I hope many of our residents look forward to participating in the planning and citizen participation for appropriate development, and then for the traffic improvements and the bike and pedestrian access. That's all very exciting. And I think our neighbors along Crestline are very excited about the proposals that you mentioned there. We're going to move on to my part of the presentation. So if our host will present the next slide, I'm going to go over this fairly quickly. Commissioner Rader already talked about the small area plan. We've been following these redevelopment plans for that area now for the last 4 or 5 years. And if you were in the neighborhood, I think maybe you will recall, we actively fought against the racetrack development because we were terribly afraid of the traffic problems that would occur, particularly people coming off the highway, go to racetrack, and then try to make a U-turn to get back on the highway. So we're very pleased that the Stein Investment Group came along and bought the property and came up with what we believe is a very appropriate development for that 4 acres, a little bit less than 4 acres. So we actually actively supported the proposed redevelopment, and that's a bit unusual for our civic association. Typically, we tend to be neutral, but I think in this situation, we felt that it was important to support it. We also got the support from the neighboring associations, the Sagamore Hills Group, and then the North Briarcliff Residents Association. Other than that, we've been following the developments of Pendergrass Farms. We see that as a good development. We are disappointed that Brookhaven keeps marching into DeKalb County. There's not much we could do about the annexations of Lenox Park nor the Target property. And of course, we're following the proposed cityhood efforts by Vista Grove. 4 or 5 years ago, when the proposed city of La Vista Hills was on the books, I personally spent a lot of time trying to figure out what are the finances. It wasn't clear. There was a lot of confusion about the taxation, about the overall finances for the city, and so forth. This time around, there's a different group of people, and the taxes are different because somewhere along the way, the host tax reductions were reapportioned between the unincorporated and the cities. And so it's not clear what's going to happen there. I don't have enough details there to have an informed judgment, but I will keep following that. And as soon as we get more information, I'll try to sort that out. I don't have any preconceived ideas of whether a city of Vista Grove would be beneficial or harmful. Brookhaven, well, you see what Brookhaven's doing. They have allowed developers to go to maximum development heights without any, considerations. And Chamblee has allowed developers to go basically without limit in the Executive Park area. Sorry, Century Center, yeah. We've also been following the proposed traffic changes by Georgia DOT for the Claremont corridor. The Sagamore Hills people are actually, or have been taking the lead on that, and we've been sort of following along, trying to figure out what's going on there. So all of these things are in the purview of the Zoning and Public Planning Committee. I welcome the assistance of people in our neighborhood. Several people like Mike Swan has been very active with the traffic issues. Barbara Vargas, of course, has been taking the lead on zoning and, of course, helping to close down the nightclubs a couple of years ago. So if you're interested in participating, send me a message. Gunter Sharp, one word, at yahoo.com, or send it to somebody on the board, send it to Ricky, and then we'll get together on that. One other thing I want to mention, that it's not just the annexations that affect the density of the development. The annexations by the city of Brookhaven lead to potential tax abatements. Recently, there was a proposed tax abatement for the property around the Dresden Road tag office. Well, it's a tax and motor vehicle tag office. And that tax abatement affects not just the city services or the county services that would be provided, it also affects the school taxes. the school board has no seat at the table when it comes to making decisions on tax abatements. So that's a sort of an odd situation. The Georgia law right now is not very clear on that. There may not be anything about Georgia law on that. I've heard some information from Representative Mary Margaret Oliver that they're trying to clarify some of these things and not allow cities to basically shortchange the school system on taxes because they want to give a tax abatement, which a tax reduction for a developer. So I'll stop here and see if there are any questions, and then if not, we'll move on to the rest of the program.
Okay, seeing no questions, I'm gonna toss it back to Ricky to wrap things up for us.
There we go. All right. Thank you very much for joining us today. And we look forward to working with the new board members. And I'm sure that our new member portal and everything is going to be really good for our membership drive. And maybe eventually we can get back to some social events. Thank you very much for joining us, and have a good afternoon.